Welcome to the Tomorrow Zone Catalyst podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Rubin. It seems like every conversation these days revolves around AI, automation, agents, productivity, and companies are racing to move faster and faster all the time. Leaders are asking, how do we automate more? Teams are trying to figure out what work still belongs to humans. And the pace is just outrageous. As my husband would say, it's redonkulous. AI is transforming how work gets done. And at the same time, we're starting to move past the hype and the sizzle of automation potential, which I'm really excited about. And it's interesting because what I'm starting to see in conversations with leaders, especially across the equipment finance space, is that we are starting to embrace this new reality of a world with AI. So now a bigger question is emerging about our future in a world where everyone has access to the same intelligence, the same tools, the same automation potential. What happens when speed, scale, and efficiency are no longer differentiators? What does it mean to be human? Today, we're exploring the rise of what some are calling the meaning economy, a shift where human judgment, trust, creativity, empathy, and discernment and purpose are becoming more valuable than ever. And it may become the most important competitive advantage in the future. So I'm really excited about this conversation. And joining me today is Tomorrow Zone's Director of Operations, Jenica Berg. Many of you may already know her from past episodes, and she is bringing a thoughtful blend of both operational and human-centered perspective to the discussion. She dives deep in her research, and so she's been digging deep in this topic for me. And Jenica, I just want to welcome you back to the show, and I'm just going to hand it over to you to take us through some of the signals of change that we're observing right now in the Tomorrow Zone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deb. I'm excited to be back, and I'm excited to do this kind of a part two of reading some articles and talking through them. And before we start looking at some of the articles, I want to actually give a definition of the meaning economy. I don't want to assume people know what that means and just make sure that we're all on the same page. So the meaning economy is an emerging shift in how value is created in an AI-driven world. As automation and artificial intelligence increasingly handle tasks, information, and even parts of decision-making, human value moves towards the things technology cannot fully replicate. Things like trust, empathy, judgment, creativity, purpose, discernment, and meaningful connection. In the meaning economy, competitive advantage is no longer based on only speed, scale, or efficiency. It's increasingly shaped by what people and organizations stand for, how they make people feel, how they build trust, and how they create meaningful human experiences in a highly automated world. And so Deb and I have found a handful of articles. And so I'm just going to introduce the first one. I'm going to share my screen here so that I can show you. And just to our audience, I'll link all of these in the show notes. So if you want to dig in a little bit deeper, feel free to do that. So the first article is entitled Death by 1,000 Paper Cuts, and it's by Thordur Arnason.
I love this one.
Yeah,
this was the catalyst. This was the spark that, just, sent me down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, this is a good one. And what Arnason does is he explores how AI is quietly transforming knowledge work by removing friction, one workflow, one task, one interface at a time. The author argues that organizations fully integrating AI into their operations are pulling ahead rapidly, while others risk falling behind without fully understanding why. So, Deb, what stood out to you about this article?
Well, first of all, the title. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, because I've done work in digital transformation in banking and equipment finance and adjacent markets for a long time. And this phrase comes up all the time. And so this is a long-standing problem, the whole death by 1,000 paper cuts thing. But in a world of AI, it kind of takes a different shape. And so what stood out to me first as I came back to review this article again, because I read this a while ago, but it was the divide. And so in the author's research, he found that 5% of firms are already deeply AI integrated. And so what does that mean? That means that AI is now operating infrastructure, not a sexy side project. It's just how we do things. 5%. 35% are scaling AI adoption and starting to register value. And I'm starting to see that in pockets, even in the equipment finance space, in the conversations that I'm having. And so that is starting to happen. I'm not seeing a lot in the 5% yet, but I think it's emerging. And so, I agree with his numbers, just, generally looking at business. 60% minimal to no material gains despite real spending on AI. That's a problem. And it's a radical split because that gap between the 5% and the 60% is really scary to consider, because in the 5% camp, what's happening is their AI advantage. It's structural, and it's rapidly compounding their advantage. And they're leaving the 60% behind, and they're delivering sometimes 3x in company value. And so I think that was a pretty stark contrast. And, if you feel like you're being left behind, you could be.
Yeah, I found it interesting. It was really almost a mind shift between a tool, AI as a tool, and AI as a foundational part of the actual work structure. And that does create such a huge divide. So, Deb, the article describes AI becoming part of the workflow itself, not just a tool people use, which is what I just mentioned. What do you think leaders may be underestimating about that shift?
Okay, first of all, if you're a leader, don't feel bad. There's so much that we don't know about AI yet. This is emerging really, really fast at an exponential pace. I've been using AI for 10 years, and I'm still astounded all the time about how much I still need to learn. So, what are leaders underestimating about this shift? I think that, some are still thinking about the shape of work in maybe an outdated way, because, while some are still thinking about workflows as an assembly line process, the winners are actually reimagining the entire shape of work. We're underestimating the value of imagination in business in favor of automating what we've always done. And when we're automating the way that things have always been, the way that things have always been done, in a world where we now have the ability to reimagine how we operate, when AI can become a new layer that's running underneath everything we do, it becomes more like electricity. It's like a utility that's enabling just our day to day, and AI enables so many things: reading, writing, analyzing, connecting, until we can stop thinking about where does AI fit into our workflows. And the new thinking, I think, for shaping the future is asking a better question: who can we become because workflow is AI? That's a giant mindset shift. And I think that this article poses it really well.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting as you're talking, I'm thinking, AI it's a completely different thing. Like the way that it works is brand new. And so using it with processes and workflows that are not brand new, you're losing so much in that. It's such a great opportunity to really step back and completely reimagine how we're doing work and what needs to stay the same, what needs to change. And I think that's what that 5% is really doing. And that's why they're seeing so much power. It's not, I think sometimes in the frantic of, I have to do this, it's like just putting more frosting on the cupcake. And pretty much, you don't even want to eat that cupcake because it's all like technicolor and gross. And so it's a matter of, okay, well, how can we make this better and not just keep layering on? So
we use a lot of cake.
We do. We like so much frosting.
I'm not a big fan of cake or frosting.
Like a good cookie. It's interesting. I feel like this is a both and, because one of the biggest concerns raised is that organizations may eliminate the very experiences that help people develop judgment and wisdom. And You've heard me say this many times in our conversations that in order to become an expert, a lot of times you have to be really, really good at the basics. And if we're eliminating that basics layer, what are we doing long term? How should leaders think about that tension?
You know, this is a this is a big challenge for the future. I don't know how. All I know is they must. If you think about how we learn as humans, and whenever I reflect back on how I've learned anything, whether it was learning some new scary trick in gymnastics or learning how to ride a bike or learning how to do what I'm doing today, all of it came through going through and struggling through the messy middle of friction as I was learning, as I sucked on the way to becoming good at doing the thing. And we're eliminating that now with AI. So this really got me thinking, because this is all about friction and the meaning of friction and where's the place of friction. I've even had conversations with clients as we're imagining the workflows for the leasing company of the future. What is the place of friction strategically in the design of the future? In the past, friction was always thought of as something to be eliminated from internal processing, something to be eliminated from the customer experience. And actually, in the world of the past, where we had a different type of a tool set to stand on, whole roles were created because of process friction. It's a different day today, but I think about it. I mean, even within this same decade, I recall working with an equipment finance company who had such a complex and convoluted sales commission plan and policy and calculation. There was an entire role, a human was designated, and this entire role was created to have someone that deeply understood the policy, the mathematical gymnastics, the data model, and they could orchestrate a bunch of spreadsheets and calculations and gyrations to get the numbers from a variety of disconnected data sources every single month so that they could run the commissions. In a world of AI, that entire process, which is in essence friction, can be eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
Over-engineered complexity is no longer a moat. When it comes to your job role. And what does that mean? What does that mean for business? What does that mean for careers? The processes, the policies, the tasks are built for the world of the past. And now we have new building blocks. We can think completely different. Now, on the flip side, though, when we think about lower level roles and we think about talent that's moving up and developing, where is that friction and where is the struggle for them to develop those abilities that are so vital for the future? What happens when we take away those things that actually are the things that develop critical thinking, your ability to ask better questions, your ability to synthesize, to iterate? What happens in 5 years when we have automated so much that we have blown out the up and coming bench? And the article talks about the potential of, falling off of a capability cliff within about 5 years because we've eliminated the very thing that's developing talent. And so I think that leaders must be thinking about this. In some areas we can scale decision making and judgment where it makes sense. But where might you be dangerously eliminating it? And not thinking about the talent of the future and the capabilities of the future. And so this is a dilemma. It really is. And I think we need to give it attention.
Yeah, it reminds me, I was a psychology major, and one of the concepts that has just stuck with me and I've used throughout my whole life is the concept of short-term gain versus long-term gain. And the importance of sometimes you have to deal with short-term pain, friction because of the long-term gain. And I think this goes back to, again, not just layering your processes on, but really stopping and evaluating what are we doing and why are we doing it? is this piece important for someone to learn in order to grow and bring value to our company later? And if it is, then what does that look like? And if it isn't, then that's probably a great option for automation. But it's again stopping and being so intentional about how we're building and what we're doing, and not just assuming that not just assuming it either goes away or that it has to continue as it always has.
And I think that's a really important point too when we're thinking about learning, because this isn't just about saying, oh, we're losing the thing we had in the past that created the opportunities for learning. But the other opportunity that we have is to lean into imagination. What's possible now and what's next? And so I'm starting to see interesting new approaches to developing that bench, and, and taking a cue from way back in the past, looking at apprenticeship type models and other models for helping humans to learn the very skills that are actually going to enable us to thrive in the future. And it's those human skills that are so important, especially when this type of technology capability is becoming ubiquitous.
Yeah. And that's a great transition to our next article, which specifically is talking about imaginative leadership. So I'm just going to share my screen here and just give you a little bit of a brief summary of this article. So this is called The Strategic Vision for a Post-Automation Economy. And it's a blog post on a website called Curiouser.ai. And it argues that automation reaches saturation, competitive advantage will shift from efficiency and cost leadership to meaning, trust, and values alignment. The companies and institutions that succeed in the next phase of economic evolution will be those that prioritize ethical design, human connection, and imaginative leadership. And I love that phrase, imaginative leadership. And Deb, why do you think this conversation about meaning is emerging right now?
I think part of it is that the tools first trap is showing its ugly head. There's so much hype about doing something about AI, and leaders are increasingly under pressure. We were just approached by a company recently, like, we need to do something about AI. Can you help us? And, probing a little bit to find, well, where's this coming from? Well, our leaders are getting pressure from the board. So, it's not always because, hey, we want to achieve this amazing outcome. It's because we need to be able to say that we've done something with AI. And that's tools first thinking. And I think that, the research in this article is really interesting, showing that there's reduced employee engagement because of the focus on tools over the cultural implications for humans. If we're not thinking in terms of systems and even at a higher level in ecosystems within our company, we're missing it. I saw a headline today about, big important bankers talking about how they're going to blow out a bunch of people with AI because they view their business as a human assembly line. First mistake.
Yeah.
It's not and never has been. It's an ecosystem of technology systems and human systems and processes and policies with a layer of trust that actually makes it happen. And I think that we're missing the bigger picture with this narrow focus on where can I automate? And I keep coming back to this example that I think we talked about in a recent episode, where, the thought was, okay, well, we're just going to throw AI into the call center. We're going to automate all the easy calls until the humans are left to deal with only the most complex, dramatic, and difficult calls. Until you've got a human going an entire day with no wins whatsoever. And I mean, what sort of level of torment is that? I wonder what their retention is like in an environment like that. And I hope they've fixed it. But, the other thing is, I think this topic matters a lot right now because customer satisfaction is starting to decline in situations where AI is replacing the human completely. I know for myself, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've experienced shouting into the void, my patients worn to a frazzle, and saying over and over, just let me speak to a human. Because as much as you're adding AI, human systems are different and they involve nuance. And when the stakes are high, I don't want to deal with your dumb machine.
Yeah,
And most
exactly.
people don't.
Yeah, you're right. And, after we've all been screaming into the void, then those are the people that end up finally with the human that are frazzled and upset. And yeah, they're the ones then you think about on the other end of that, they're never getting a happy person. So yeah, this article asks, and I love this question, what do we stand for when now that speed, scale, and cost are no longer differentiators? How do you interpret that question?
So, I mean, on the flip side, there's a lot of dumb use of AI. I have seen many great software platforms decline in their usability and practicality and actual practical outcomes because of the rush to sprinkle AI on top so we look cool. I think, in a world where everybody's adopting AI at high speed, we can lose differentiation. And in the past, and it made sense in the past, because we had a different tool set and we had workflows and processes and products that were designed for that world of the past. But the world has shifted. And so now we're in a world where everybody's adopting AI. And if your differentiation was speed and scale and driving down cost, if those are no longer differentiators, then what does differentiate you? And it reminds me of that scene in The Incredibles when Dash wants to, use his superpower and he wants to run really, really fast, but he has to hold back his superpowers and be like everyone else. And he wasn't allowed to be special. And this conversation with his mom, and he's like, well, if everybody's special, then no one is. And I think that's happening in business. And it's going to happen very quickly if the adoption ticks up. And I was just at an executive retreat in Chicago last month, and the phrase that stuck with me is the most human wins. And I do believe I can see that as a potential future for us in business. When everyone has the same tech advantages, we get back to what really matters, and it's trust. It's ethics, it's authenticity, it's values, the true differentiators, the things that make us most human.
Yeah, I think you just answered the next question, and you might want to just deep dive a little bit more. But what human capabilities become more valuable in this kind of environment?
It's interesting. It's the ones that I was talking about back in 2020, as I was talking about the exponential advancing pace of AI. It was, strategic thinking, imagination, discernment, emotional intelligence. The World Economic Forum actually produced a report in 2020 called the 2020 Future of Jobs Report. And when I looked at the chart and it was showing these are the human skills that are going to be most important in 2025. Well, here we are in 2026, and it is those human skills that we have been calling soft skills for years, but they're the power skills of the future, especially in a world where we have ubiquitous machine intelligence available to us. And now it's more and more important to know, what do you stand for, and behave accordingly.
That's great. Let's take a look at our next article. And this one is called The Meaning Economy, the next great shift in value, and it's by Jamal Kay. And it expands on the idea of the meaning economy and suggests that as AI handles more cognitive labor, human-centered capabilities like what we just talked about, empathy, interpretation, trust, and purpose become increasingly valuable. And organizations may compete less on what they produce and more on what they represent. What do you think leaders misunderstand most about the meaning economy?
I think this goes back to what we were just talking about, those soft skills, because it used to be, I remember, it used to be knowledge is power, knowledge is power. Well, if the cost of access to knowledge is approaching zero, then we really have scarcity in these soft skills. The critical thinking, the ability to understand context, developing trust, interpretation, real empathy, not mimicked empathy that comes from a machine. I remember, okay, so I have to tell the story. Okay, I remember working for a software company, and I had to be out for a funeral for a family member. And I remember just how awful I felt when I received an obviously automated condolence message from their HR department.
Wow.
Just because you can automate doesn't mean you should.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't forget that, underneath all of this ability to innovate and leverage these technologies, if innovation is not in service of improving the human experience in some way, why are we doing it?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that meaning is becoming the differentiator. It's not how fast you can do the thing. It's trust. It's purpose. That's going to make the difference.
Yeah. How does the shift redefine leadership?
I think this is a tricky space because, especially again, the work that we do in equipment finance, I hear people talking a lot about their secret sauce. And we've joked about this in innovation forums over the years, because when you start working across a number of different companies, what they think is their secret sauce, the thing that I see when I look at the meta patterns across how all these very unique and nuanced companies work, their secret sauce isn't all that secret or saucy. Really, they're doing the same things and they're calling it their advantage. Well, what happens when AI blows that out? If your secret sauce is tech driven, well, it's not going to be too long before others catch up with you. And so is that really an advantage? I think that the danger there is accelerating where your innovation, your advantage actually becomes commoditized. And so then what? It's just kind of like electricity. These things just become expected. They become utility. I don't think every day about, oh, I get to turn the lights on. Like it just, on autopilot, hit the switch and it turns on. If it doesn't, then I'm thinking about electricity.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it's not special anymore. And what is special though is back to meaning, ethics, and values and trust, real human trust. That's, I think, the thing that becomes scarce. And, where is the part of humans and where is the part of technology in that? And who do we trust? And how's our trust in AI going? Mm-hmm. That's a pretty mixed bag right now if you look across society.
Yeah.
And when the stakes are high, when everything can be automated and systematized, I love what the article said. When everything can be automated and systematized, really it comes down to helping customers align money with purpose. That's what it's about in banking and finance. Mm-hmm. And let's not forget that that's what it's about.
Yeah. I think it's almost like when like all these just all the things that can be automated, it's almost like they're getting just washed away. And then what is left standing? And what's left standing is who we are as humans. And so as leaders, it's so much more important now than ever to invest in our own humanity, but also to invest in the humanity of those on our team. Because that's what stands. And those are the skills that are going to continue. And so while it's like a paradox of as tech increases, we need to invest in our humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we've been through this before in so many cycles with the advent of the personal computer, the internet, cloud, in-memory analytics. I was thinking about that example this morning. That used to be super cutting edge, and now you can just speak natural language and get the same thing, given good data.
Yeah.
I think that if we're just optimizing only for productivity and efficiency, we're missing it. And I'm just thinking back to my recent experience with Amazon, and obviously they were optimizing their process for something. Algorithmically, they optimized their on-demand book printing and distribution process for something. And from my perspective, obviously it wasn't customer experience because I ordered a batch of 200 books, which one would reasonably expect to arrive in up to 4 boxes, for a human compatible. Otherwise it's too heavy.
Yeah.
But instead it came in 49 separate shipments. And so if you're optimizing only for productivity and efficiency, you're losing out the human experience. And, Amazon doesn't care that I'm already looking at 3 other options for fulfillment for bulk book orders. I'm not big enough for them to care. But, at scale, if you're optimizing only for productivity and efficiency, it's only a matter of time before it does matter to a company that your customers are leaving because that's your focus.
So what happens to organizations that are continuing to optimize only for productivity and efficiency?
Well, in addition to impacting your customer experience in a not so awesome way, I think that you also could blow out your talent bench for the future and lose what draws customers to you. And that comes down back to, what you stand for.
Yeah. Let's take a look at our last article here. And this is actually...
This one rocks my world.
Yeah. I mean, rocks your world so much that we've actually talked about it twice, but it's so powerful. And we have discussed this previously, but this is where the first place that we heard the concept of the meaning economy. And so sort of catalyzed us digging in more. And it's called I'm Begging You to Write More Essays. It's by Dan Koh. And it argues that while AI can generate content and stimulate ideas, humans still need to actively engage in reflection, writing, and deep thinking to preserve our ability to make meaning, develop discernment, and understand complexity. Deb, do you think we're losing the ability to think deeply?
Unfortunately, yeah. Yeah, and this actually is sad because there are so many problems in our world right now that are worth solving and they matter. But, I think the article put it really well. If we're going to solve the big problems in our world, any civilizational threat or business threat for that matter, you must have people that are capable of understanding the problem to be solved.
Mm-hmm.
Properly framing it and identifying it, first of all, but also understanding why it matters.
Yeah.
But too many people, instead of doing that level of deep thinking, are drooling over cat videos on their phones that are served up in an instant in TikTok and whatever else, or they're, letting AI do their thinking for them. I mean, to the point where there are memes now, like, the guy at the restaurant, ooh, the server just said hello to me. What should I say? And we talked about cognitive offloading and cognitive surrender on a previous episode, but I think that this is a big challenge, and it comes back to that friction. There's friction involved in intentionally stepping back and reflecting on doing the deep thinking to try to understand a system and its components and the first, second, and third order effects of any change that you might make in that system. And if we lose systems thinking and we start developing solutions that are narrow and siloed, we end up in situations like the Amazon situation. We're optimizing the algorithm for productivity and efficiency in one siloed area, but we're not thinking of the whole entire system in the big picture and the human system that's impacted because of our actions in one area. And so I think that there's a lot to this. And the last thing I want is to lose my ability to think deeply. And so this article really impacted me. It's actually affected some of my own habits and practices lately.
Well, let's get into that because I know that you, after reading this, have been really intentional. And so how do you balance using AI as a tool without outsourcing too much of your own discernment and creativity?
So I start with my own thinking, and I leverage AI to accelerate developing those thoughts, challenging those thoughts, but I also constantly challenge what's coming back from AI. Also because one thing I found, and I found this actually, I found that in writing my book, there's nothing that will crystallize your thinking more than trying to explain it to someone else in writing. And it has brought so much clarity for me, but it was a struggle going through that. And I was testing my ideas with AI. And, because it's interesting how we can leverage AI to play different personas, be the skeptic. I actually have one that I call now the Jenica bot that, I tried to unpack some patterns in how Jenica thinks about my work and challenges it so that I could, streamline and automate that challenge even more. I'm like, no, she's going to ask this. I know she's going to ask this. Well, the thing that I found though is that because AI is pulling from this pool of information that everybody else is pulling for, when you're bringing some new thinking to the table, it tries to pin you back into the status quo. I had to intentionally guard against that constantly and set up checks and guardrails anytime I was collaborating with AI as I was developing ideas or trying to sort out how to tell a story. And, I've always been not very confident in terms of my grammar and my writing ability. And so using it to help, refine and polish and stuff. But it kept trying to paint me into a corner that's not me. And so I think that knowing that has changed how I engage. But also once I read this article, I realized that if I'm not actually going through the struggle of thinking for myself offline, I actually could be losing some of my cognitive ability. I went through a phase like this in 2018 as I was reading about the addictive nature of social media and the way that software is being developed. I mean, as a former software developer and product manager, I was very curious about how you develop addictive products, as an advantage. But when I read that, I was like, oh, actually, I'm going to internalize this and change my own practice. And I started training my brain to not crave distraction. And now I'm training my brain to pause and slow down even more often when it comes to thinking and creating space to think more deeply. Because I think in our rush world, we can really get caught up quickly to a point where we lose that. Like when's the last time you just went for a walk without your phone with you?
Mm-hmm.
Or without some kind of input, podcast, book, or some other thing, it's personal development. And still your brain never has time to actually be bored and think and create new connections. And it's in those spaces when you're in the shower and like electricity doesn't mix. Why do ideas come to you there? Well, it's because you're giving yourself space to think without all these other inputs. And so I just feel like we have to, to balance. I don't know if there's balance. I really have a hard time with that word, but we just have to be intentional about what sort of guardrails are we putting around our own mind. I mean, the most important thing we invest in is what's in between our ears. And that needs to last us for a long time.
It's interesting because as you're talking, I'm thinking about the analogy you already used of Dash. And, if we're all going to the same pool for our creative brainstorms, then that's not special because it's all the same. It's when we come with our own thoughts that it becomes special. So when you think about the future, what does uniquely human actually mean?
And this is the question of the whole episode.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, what does it mean to be human in a world where we're trying to systematize that through mimicry of machines?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it means getting back to the basics of who we are, our values, our purpose. And to me, it's the soul behind the work. I mean, it's one thing to see beautiful content generated by AI. It's another thing entirely to appreciate if it's something that was genuinely created by a human. There's a different level of appreciation. I was actually just reading recently, I don't know where this article is or I would have shared it with you, but there was an experiment that someone did, and they took this painting of water lilies and they posted it and said that it was generated by AI, and the people were interacting negatively with it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this isn't good and blah, 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 because they thought that it was generated by an AI, but it was actually the painting that was created by a human. And so even just the thought that it was created by a machine and rather than a soul has value to us as humans. And so I think that, I don't know the answer to this. I mean, I think that we're all trying to figure this out, but I do think that there's a place for humans in all of this. And we really need to relegate technology to become that enabling layer in our world. And we are still the thought leaders. We are still in charge. We're still the ones that we're using it to make a better world for humans.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what's the point? And there's probably more elegant ways to say all of this, but I just, in a world where we're surrounded by artificial everything, I think real human is going to have the most value.
Yeah.
It's the difference between junk food, artificial flavors, or like blueberries. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I was thinking throughout humanity, what has set us apart is the creative aspect. And it's interesting because that creative aspect is what has allowed us to build AI. And yet now that it's here, we need to never turn it over. And I think, it because that is still what sets us apart. Well, Deb, thanks for inviting me into this conversation with you. As we've talked about a lot of things today, and if our listeners remember one thing from today, what do you hope it is?
I hope that people will actually step back, pause, and think about all of this. I mean, what gives me hope for the future as we're moving deeper into AI is that we're having this conversation now.
Mm-hmm.
Because we shape the future by the actions that we take and the decisions that we make now.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you to our audience for joining us in this conversation. And as we move deeper into the AI era, the future will not be defined by automation alone. While AI continues transforming how work gets done, the human side of leadership, creativity, judgment, trust, and meaning may become more valuable than ever. The leaders and organizations that thrive will be the ones who balance technological capability with human connection, purpose, and discernment. Because when everyone has access to the same tools, what truly differentiates us is how we lead, how we think, and what we stand for. If this conversation resonates with you, check out Deb's book, Enter the Tomorrow Zone. It's now available on Amazon. And if you see yourself in it, book a call with us. We would love to explore shaping the future with you. As always, we love it when you like, subscribe, and share our episodes with a friend. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, stay curious and choose to make awesome happen.